Hi everyone, this is Mr. Fokowski, and today we're going to be looking at the role of political parties in American democracy. They play an enormous role that we can still see very much today, as many of you are very aware of the two major political parties in our system today, and we're going to be looking at those a little bit more in depth. So a political party, by definition, is one that seeks to elect a candidate to public office by giving them an identification that is recognizable to the electorate or constituency. So when people run for office, they typically identify with a political party, either that being Republican or being a Democrat. You don't really see any third parties typically. Occasionally you will, but for the major presidential elections, you see that R or you see that D, or if it's even in local elections, you may not even know the person, and you will vote just based on whether that person has a R or a D next to his or her name. Political parties were once extremely powerful institutions, especially in the late 1800s, early 1900s, with political bosses. Now we see that the role of political parties is growing extremely weaker, where they once had a firm control over the party, and many of the candidates, we've seen that decline over time, and even less, actually even fewer people are identifying with political parties today. But before we get into that, let's look at how parties can be thought of in three major parts. At the very base is the electorate. This is the constituency, the voters, the people who belong to the party. For your party to be successful, you want your electorate or constituency to be as large as possible, because those are the people voting the people who belong to your party into office, if they do win. And then you have a party as an organization that will deal with the efforts to get someone elected, get endorsements, run campaigns. And then at the very top, those are the people in your party who have been elected into office. So party and the electorate, as I just stated, is the largest component of the party. What's interesting about the United States is that to become a Republican or to become a Democrat, you do not need to pay any dues. You don't need a membership card. Unlike Europe, which actually you would actually pay dues to your political party, and there would be numerous political parties that you could belong to. So no one today typically carries around a membership card. But if you want to identify yourself as a Republican, well, then you call yourself, I'm part of the Republican Party. You don't necessarily have to register. You can, but it's that easy to identify with the party. And then we also have party and organization. So this deals with everyone working at the national office, full-time staff, rules, bylaws, budgets. There are even state and local headquarters. So the political party, one of the main things is the grassroots efforts to get out the vote for whether it's the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. But you want to keep the party being highly influential. You want people to identify with the party. So you need to have grassroots efforts, campaign efforts to get as many people into your party as possible. And they're also important in keeping the party running between elections, because right before a presidential election or a midterm election, everyone's paying attention to what the political party is saying. But then in between the midterm and presidential elections, you don't really see all that much happening. People aren't as mobilized, people aren't as excited. So political parties try to continue to engage their constituency. And then the fewest people in the party belong in government. These are your elected officials of the party, and they are not always going to agree on policy. And I think the best example of this is when the Tea Party, who identifies with the Republican Party, has been in major disagreement with more of the mainstream Republican Party. So it's been very difficult to pass laws or pass legislation because there's a split within the party. So again, just because you're Republican doesn't mean you're always going to agree with your fellow Republicans. Some might be more liberal on tax reform, while others might be much more conservative. So there are issues still within government, even within the political party itself. And Republicans in 2014 have really had to wrestle and deal with this extensively. So political parties, although you may not think this, but political parties actually have a major role in American democracy. And as we've talked about briefly before, they are linkage institutions. Think of the media in terms of the channels through which people's concerns become political issues on the government's policy agenda. Well, the media absolutely informs the people about what's going on and it connects them with the government. Political parties are the same exact way because if you think about it, people are going to essentially relay their concerns based on who they vote for, and they want that person to put forth a specific policy agenda. Again, when we talk about policy, we're talking about legislation. So what you want to see in terms of legislation in your government. If you want fewer taxes to pay, well, then that's policy. You're going to then elect a person within the specific party that you like who endorses your view of what policy should be enacted, and that person, hopefully, if elected, will do what you voted for. That's how this linkage institution is connecting you with policy. So people, us, right, we have interests, we have problems, we have concerns, and through linkage institutions such as the media and political parties will connect us with government. It's political issues. This is what essentially Congress will concern itself with, and hopefully this will end up in as policy, if depending on what you want, and this will impact people hopefully in a beneficial way. So that political parties undoubtedly are linkage institutions. Parties also pick candidates. Each party will nominate or endorse someone, and this endorsement is now done by the people. So we have things like primaries where we elect one of, let's say, 8 Republicans running for president. Well, the person who receives the nomination will go on to run for president against a fellow Democrat. What is interesting is prior to the 20th century, people within the political party chose the candidate. So now it's up to the people to choose the candidate. But before the 20th century, you had people within the organization choosing it. So again, that's how political parties have lost some of their influence as well. Parties also run campaigns. They're very important in coordinating local, state, national ads, especially with television. So in addition to that, and as I've been trying to reinforce, is that political parties have become weaker over time. You now see more candidates running without as much party support. You have television, you can reach a mass number of people. Prior to this point, you might have, mailings going out left and right. You might have supporters knocking on doors left and right. But now with television, it makes it a heck of a lot easier. So individuals don't need to rely on the political party itself as much anymore. Political parties also give cues to voters. They say what we stand for. They have an image. Republicans are known for lower taxes, wanting fewer, regulations on the environment or on the economy, whereas Democrats are the opposite. Parties also serve as watchdogs in terms of they will decry matters from the opposing party. If they see corruption, they're going to be hounding that other party. Well, one reason because it's, corruption, let's say, and another reason is they want to get the Democratic votes, hypothetically, to the Republican side or vice versa. So they do play an instrumental role in serving as watchdogs. And again, they're going to be constantly informing the public what the other party is doing wrong, why you should vote for this party and not that party. And then political parties also coordinate policy making, right? Laws and legislation. So amongst this, the 3 branches, right? You're a fellow Republican, okay, you can coordinate it better because we all identify with one party. So we should share, for the most part, common values. Again, doesn't always happen either. But also working with people in the state government. Oh, you're a fellow Republican? Excellent. Maybe it will be easier to work together. So those are some of the major roles and tasks of political parties. And as I said before, you should very much familiarize yourself with how political issues eventually get onto the political agenda. So the people are linked via political parties to politicians who will then enact policy, which will ultimately end up resulting in an impact on people, whether that's beneficial or not beneficial. So why a 2-party system? Well, it just makes sense. There's a consensus of values, so people who identify with similar views on social and economic policy, well, it makes sense that you might be a Republican or a Democrat or be an independent. And then there's also the historical influence. Remember, Federalists and Anti-Federalists, they were basically the 2 main factions that resulted during the ratification process of the U.S. Constitution. And essentially, you could call those political parties. Now also remember that George Washington had warned against the destructive nature of political parties, but during, again, the ratification process, Madison and Federalist number 10 in the Federalist Papers states that, you can use this human tendency to form political parties or factions against one another to keep each one in check. So there is, of course, that historical influence there. And then last but not least, you have the winner takes all system. And why this helps for a two-party system is this. So for example, if the Democratic Party got 30% of the vote, the Independent Party gets 19% of the vote, and the Republican Party gets 51% of the vote, only the Republican Party wins because it gets the winner takes all systems. For example, let's say in Congress when voting in for congressional members. In Europe, basically what would happen is that in this case, the Democratic Party would get then 30% of representation in Congress. The Independent Party would get 19%, and then 51% would be given to the Republican Party. So you'd still have members within each party being represented. But that's only in a proportional representation, and that's Europe. Fortunately, only in the United States, you only get one winner. It's the party that gets the most votes wins, and that's one of the reasons why we only have a two-party system. It's very, very difficult for third parties to get in on any representation because they need to win a plurality of the votes, which typically does not happen. And in case you were ever wondering, how did the Democrats and the Republicans get their symbols? Well, actually, the donkey goes all the way back to Democratic candidate Andrew Jackson, who was labeled by his enemies as a jackass, and he actually embraced the term, and this eventually was popularized by political cartoonist Thomas Nast, who also was instrumental in coming up with the Republican party symbol being the elephant, which was supposed to be a donkey clothed in lion skin, scaring away all the animals at the zoo with the exception of the elephant. And that's as easy as it was for these two parties to get their two symbols, which still exist today. Okay, so moving on, we have something called the rational choice theory, and this assumes that individuals act in their own best interests, weighing the costs and benefits of possible alternatives. And this is also based off of Downs' model, which assumes that voters maximize chances that policies they favor are adopted by government. So essentially, political parties want to adopt favorable policies in that if party A figures out what voters want more accurately than party B, then hypothetically party A should win. So most people in political parties, you'll notice, are moderates. So within the mean perception of the Democratic Party, you'll see that most people fall into the slightly liberal category. And then within the Republican Party, you have slightly conservative. You don't necessarily see as many extremists on either side, whether that being the 1 or the 7 over here. So that's why political parties tend to take middle of the road policies because they want to attract as many voters as possible. And you'll also notice one other thing, that most moderates are right in the middle, that they don't necessarily identify with either party. They tend to be more independent. So that is why these two parties are sometimes cave and go into the middle because they want to attract these independents to their party. You will have people on the outsides of let's say the Democratic Party who are extremely liberal who want the party to be more extreme, or the same thing with Republicans. So political parties have a lot of influences just within their party to be extremely more left-wing or right-wing, while others say go toward the middle because that's where the majority of the voters are. Ultimately, what and who identifies as a Democrat versus a Republican? And this is very much similar to what we looked at in terms of who's more liberal or conservative. But one thing I do want to draw your attention to is that you'll notice that many are independent, and that has been a result of a weaker political party system in the United States, and it's been declining, and you see that by the rise of the number of independents. So for example, males, only 30% identify themselves as Democrats versus 25% Republican, but then you have that 45 in the middle who identify themselves as independent. Now you might remember from talking about ideologies that men tend to be more conservative than liberal. But again, even though you might be conservative, you may not necessarily identify yourself with being a Republican. That's why we see, again, more independence over time. And just to recap, most Americans are moderates. 2/3 of the population believe there are important differences between parties, as you see here, and that's where we'll end today.